a place we affectionately call the death field. This is a place where watermelons come to die. And so we have a couple of disease problems in this field that we're going to attempt to control using some novel methods. So what's one thing people see in this field that's not watermelons? You see white clover or ladino clover. And that's what this trial is all about. We have 3 different types of plantings. One using a standard mulch layer, one using a 3-foot mulch layer, and then we'll go over to the last one where we use this compact mini layer. And what we did in this field was we planted it in March to ladino clover, and then we came in May and we actually laid the plastic rod over clover, and it so we kind of incorporated the clover underneath, and we'll tell you why we thought that might do something, which it didn't do. But by the way, for those who don't know, this is my last field season. I am retiring as of next summer, so I'm getting to do all kinds of fun things. Fun projects. This is one of the fun projects. So, all right, we have a tale of 2 diseases. The first disease is this one here. Anybody know what this is? Watermelon. Yeah, I know it's a watermelon, but what disease does it have?
Rot.
It's got a rot. What kind of rot? This is called Phytophthor Fruit Rot, and it is a major problem in our watermelon producing areas, and it's just going to get worse. Anybody, this is a water mold. It likes wet conditions. Why might we see more of this in the future?
More extreme rain.
Is it getting wetter? Mm-hmm. It's getting wetter. Well, as it gets wetter, this is going to be more and more of a problem. Mm-hmm. All right, so this field is notorious for having that. And then the second disease it has, I just cut this open. The stem is all brown inside. Oh. Anybody know what that disease is? That's a disease called Fusarium Wilt, and it's endemic in our area.
Just
and,
for watermelons?
This is specific to watermelons, this type of Fusarium. We have other Fusariums.
Is it spotty, Gordon, or is it?
Is it spotty? No. What we're seeing is we have watermelons that have been in probably every field in this side of Sussex County. So this disease is in every field. So is both the Phytophthor as well as the Fusarium.
There's no way to get rid of it.
All right. Well, we'll talk about it. Well, let's talk a little bit what this trial is, and let's wander on and see why we're looking at clover. One of the things that we have normally in a watermelon field, what do we have in the middle between the plastic?
Clover and weeds.
No, but what do we normally have?
Rot.
It's usually bare because we keep the weeds out of it. In this trial, we're attempting to use clover as the row middle, with the idea that it will, if there is Phytophthor in the field, it will allow the watermelons to sit on the surface and not get infected. So that was the idea. The second idea was that we have some research showing that cherry vetch can reduce down Fusarium levels. Unfortunately, clover doesn't. So we thought maybe clover might have some effect on Fusarium, and it hasn't. So you can also see differences in varieties. That happens to be one that's more Fusarium resistant. This has no Fusarium resistance. And then this last area over here has more Fusarium resistance. But in that clover really came on. Brian, would you figure you would ever see clover this lush in this field? No, not. Yeah. So again, this was planted in March, and now we have row middles full of it. What we're also learning, unfortunately, is that it also kind of creates conditions where there's a little bit too much moisture, and so it's also creating a condition where watermelon diseases can proliferate, other disease, foliar disease. So we're learning a lot on how to use this. Now, if we had tomatoes or peppers in here, this would be just fine. But watermelons, it's also a little bit competitive. As you get in there, it's a little more too competitive for watermelons. In this state, we're going to probably have to mow it close before we actually plant the watermelons. But this stuff was just barely up when we planted here. So, and then we have the 3 different kinds of plastic layers. That one is a standard layer. It doesn't leave much of a strip of clover. This was the 3-foot, left a lot of clover to fill in. And this one uses that mini layer over here, where we were able to have very little area that was, forget this end where it gets wet, but you can see where it filled in very quickly, very soon. And so, well, we think that mini layer would be the way to go for this kind of system. So, all right, so let's talk about those 2 diseases. Phytophthor capsicum is a disease that affects many different vegetable crops. It affects lima beans, it affects tomatoes, it affects peppers, it affects cucumbers, it affects pumpkins and other vine crops. So again, it's one that we see in a lot of different fields. Because it's a wet disease, what will be some things that we might do to deal with it being too wet? Well, why is it too wet in between plastic? No, not the clover. I'm thinking, why would the area between plastic be wet? Yeah, well, it's impervious surface, so it basically drains into the middle. And so in a field that wouldn't have this clover in here, you'd have puddled water. And that is really where Phytophthora takes off. So we want to control water in a field. Well, some of the other things, of course, we want to have a long rotation to non-host crops. So that means no cucumbers, no lima beans, no other vegetables that get Phytophthora. So we need probably 3 minimum years to rotate. And so, again, that can be hard to do. Luckily, we do have some chemicals that can control Phytophthora if you use them right. But they're not a full answer. If it rains 10 inches, or 8 inches in a couple hours, all bets are off. So that disease will still set in. Fusarium, on the other hand, is really difficult to deal with. We do have resistance to Fusarium race 1 in a lot of varieties, such as this fascination over on the side. Unfortunately, what do we have in Delaware? We have race 2 and even race 3. So that means that our varieties that have some resistance, they don't have full resistance to Fusarium. So we're seeing more and more Fusarium being an issue. This year's been pretty bad for Fusarium across the watermelon industry. And what kind of rotation do you think that we need for Fusarium? Well, somebody said 6 years. That's not a bad guess. As many years as you can give it, because it'll be there for a long, long time. So we like a minimum of 5, but if you can go out 6, 7, 8 years, it's even better. Or if you can get ground that hasn't had watermelons on it. Any ground in Laurel and around Laurel hasn't had watermelons on it, Brian?
All of it.
All of it's had watermelons. Yeah, all of it.
Unless you got a good grafted plants.
Yeah. So that goes, and Brian, you talked about the next way that we might be able to control Fusarium, and that's the use of grafted plants. And we've trialed them in this field. Brian, did they survive in this field? Grafted plants?
That's the crop we ever grew.
Yeah, so it does work. The trouble is the plants cost 4 times what they would as far as a normal plant. So is it worthwhile if you're going to get like this metal plot where there's no watermelons? Yes, it's worthwhile, but our growers still aren't willing to adopt grafted plants fully because of the cost. But we're running out of land and we're running out of fields that don't have these new races of Fusarium, so that's going to be an issue. But we learned a lot from this trial. You know, one is how aggressive the clover can get once it gets big. The other is it really has no effect on Fusarium. But it does have a good effect on reducing down Phytophthor because it's keeping the watermelons off the ground. So this is one that I wish I was around to continue to learn how to use it, because I think it's going to be a neat system. And we didn't have to do a whole lot of weeding in here, just a little bit of hand spraying for grasses and a little bit of spraying for nutsedge. Otherwise, there's a little bit of Pennsylvania smart weed in here, nothing that really is going to affect things. So any questions? Again, this is my last attempt to play around, learn something new with a new system. Yes? Would this work for cantaloupes? Yes. The thing, I still think that we're going to have to knock this clover back before they start to vine, because it's getting the two shading. I think it's going to be. Now cantaloupes tend to shade a little bit more on the plastic. So if you use the 4-4 plastic, it might work pretty good for cantaloupes. Definitely would work for peppers, tomatoes, that kind of thing. Other questions? So you have to retire to start having fun. But this is one I learned about. They were using it down at Clemson in South Carolina. I said, well, if they can do it down here, we certainly can try it up here. And we learned a lot this year. We have a plot we won't take you to where we have watermelons and a real heavy clover plot. And we found that it really caused too much foliar diseases in the watermelon plot. On the other hand, we have some no-till pumpkins and winter squash that are looking really great, where we just use Roundup, and we round up the clover twice. It knocked it back enough that we could get a crop out